Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone reboot had all the ingredients for success, which makes the fact it didn't quite hit the mark so disappointing. In theory, the 2019 version of The Twilight Zone had everything going for it. A beloved property with an enduring cultural legacy, a return amid a resurgence of anthology TV shows, and a creator synonymous with weird sci-fi horror. What could go wrong? With the original Twilight Zone being one of the most influential shows of all time, expectations were sky-high for a Peele-led revival that could speak to modern anxieties just as Rod Serling's version had done in the 1950s and 60s. However, despite the fact it seemed like a recipe for guaranteed success, the Twilight Zone reboot ultimately failed to leave a lasting impression. The two-season run on CBS All Access, now Paramount Plus, came and went with surprisingly little fanfare, and the show wasn't renewed after its 2020 finale. While not a total failure, it had its moments. The new version of The Twilight Zone didn't become the cultural force many hoped it would. Jordan Peele's reboot promised prestige and relevance, but the execution fell short in key ways that undermined its impact. Jordan Peele was the perfect choice to helm a Twilight Zone reboot. The director wasn't to blame. Jordan Peele hosting The Twilight Zone. It's important to start with one thing when discussing the modern version of The Twilight Zone: Jordan Peele was never the problem. If anything, he was the best thing going for the 2019 Twilight Zone reboot. As a filmmaker, Peele had already proven his deep understanding of speculative fiction and allegory, with the likes of 2017's Get Out and 2019's as showing how social commentary and genre thrills could coexist. His creative voice was clear, distinctive, and often compared to Rod Serling's own, a fact made even more literal when he stepped into the iconic narrator role. The choice to make Peele the face of the reboot wasn't just a marketing gimmick. He understood what made The Twilight Zone powerful: morality tales wrapped in the strange, the uncanny, and the socially relevant. Ultimately, there's no denying he brought ambition and a respect for the original series. Jordan Peele treated the legacy of The Twilight Zone with reverence, aiming to recontextualize its themes for a modern world grappling with issues like racism, surveillance, social media, and xenophobia. His involvement ensured the show wasn't a lazy cash-in, but an attempt at meaningful reinvention. Moreover, Jordan Peele's influence elevated the profile of The Twilight Zone reboot. His involvement drew in top-tier acting talent, from Kumail Nanjiani to Stephen Yeun to Jurnee Smollett, and helped the show tackle bold topics that lesser creators may have shied away from. In fact, some of the best episodes, like Replay, which tackled police violence against Black Americans, felt like spiritual cousins to Get Out in their directness and urgency. Peele didn't just lend his name, he lent his ethos. Sadly, even the strongest creative leader can't fix every structural problem. The Twilight Zone reboot wasn't written entirely by Peele, and the anthology format made quality control difficult. Some stories simply didn't match his level of insight or voice, and the tone varied wildly from episode to episode. In a series where every installment is self-contained, the overall vision becomes harder to control. Peele was the perfect choice to helm The Twilight Zone, but he couldn't be everywhere at once, and that inconsistency eventually took a toll. When all is said and done, Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone reboot had the right creative lead, it just needed a steadier ship underneath him. The Twilight Zone reboot didn't quite capture the spirit of the original. The reboot often lost sight of the original show's elegant storytelling and timeless tone. Rod Serling smoking a cigarette in the original version of The Twilight Zone. One of the biggest reasons Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone reboot didn't connect with audiences the way it should have is that it frequently missed what made the original so iconic. Rod Serling's original Twilight Zone was more than just twist endings and eerie vibes, it was tight, economical storytelling that challenged viewers without talking down to them. The 2019 Twilight Zone reboot, while ambitious, often over-explained its ideas or leaned too heavily into social messaging without the narrative balance to back it up. The original Twilight Zone thrived on simplicity. A 25-minute runtime forced the writers to be efficient, and episodes rarely wasted a moment. The reboot, on the other hand, extended many episodes well past 45 minutes, often padding out plots that didn't need the extra time. The result was stories that felt bloated or meandering. Where Rod Serling trusted the audience to pick up on subtext, the reboot often spelled it out, and in doing so, lost the finesse that defined the original Twilight Zone. Tone was another issue. Serling's Twilight Zone had a surreal, dreamlike quality, often unsettling not because of horror, but because of moral ambiguity. The 2019 reboot sometimes confused cynicism for commentary. Many episodes delivered bleak conclusions with little catharsis, skewing closer to Black Mirror than The Twilight Zone. While some overlap between the two anthologies was inevitable, Peele's version occasionally felt more like a shadow of Black Mirror than a modern continuation of Serling's vision. Even the iconic narration sometimes felt less like connective tissue and more like a stylistic obligation. Peele performed the role well, but the scripts didn't always give him the same incisive monologues that Serling was known for. Instead of memorable intros and outros that bookend moral parables, the narration sometimes seemed detached from the action, which was a missed opportunity to tie episodes together with a unifying voice. Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone reboot had the ambition to confront modern issues, but it often forgot to wrap those issues in the type of storytelling that made the original a masterclass in allegory. The result was a show that felt heavy-handed rather than haunting, and that difference is as subtle as it is jarring. Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone had some great episodes, but it missed the mark on others. The reboot's inconsistent quality kept it from building the momentum it needed. Even with all its flaws, Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone reboot wasn't without its highlights. Several episodes of the 2019 version of The Twilight Zone managed to recapture the eerie tone and moral depth of the original, proving that the format still had power when the writing and execution aligned. Unfortunately, for every standout installment, there was one that felt forgettable or clumsy, and that inconsistency was ultimately what held the show back. For example, Season 1, Episode 3, Replay, is one of the best episodes of The Twilight Zone in any version. It's one of the strongest entries in the reboot's catalog, following a mother who discovers a camcorder that can rewind time, which she uses in a desperate attempt to save her son from a racist police officer. It's tightly written, emotionally gripping, and uses its sci-fi premise to explore